Hi, everybody. This is a great group. Awesome. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I'm Karen Appleby. I'm the co-coordinator for the program for Instructional Effectiveness here on campus at ISU. And before I introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Zac Gershberg, I just want to give you all a little bit of information right now. We have some interesting things going on in the community that certainly are going to affect the university in different ways. And so we are planning to do an emergency pie workshop on Monday the 16th from 3:30 to 5 o'clock. Alex Bollinger, who is a professor in the College of Business, is going to be giving a workshop for faculty on how to move face-to-face classes online quickly if we need to do that. And the ITRC is going to provide support for us. And I know, Lisa, I don't know if you want to provide any information. There's going to be some information coming out from the ITRC as well for faculty.
A quick document. It's a 15-page document. It will be shared to give you some kind of guidelines, additional information. But as always, the ITRC is here to support you. So anybody teaching, if you're teaching, the ITRC is here. So feel free to give us a call, come and camp out in the lab. We have a recording studio. We have a recording room. So there's lots of resources available to you.
So thank you, Lisa. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I knew you would know all of the pieces. So yes, that's nothing new to our campus faculty, the support that we get from the ITRC, but they're going to be providing additional support. The workshop will happen on Monday. That information, we're still trying to work out the details on where and those specifics, so we'll get that all out to you very quickly, but if you want to share that with your colleagues, that's great. So today I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Zac Gershberg, who is a faculty member in the Department of Communication, Media, and Persuasion. And Zac is one of our faculty associates in the program for Instructional Effectiveness. So he leads various workshops and lots of other activities that we host through the program for Instructional Effectiveness. And today, Zac's going to be talking to us about calling your shots, designing student learning outcomes for better courses. So, Zac, the floor is yours.
Oh. Okay. All right. Thank you, Karen. So do we have anyone from IF or anywhere? I just wanted to make sure before I get going here. Looks like no. Okay. No worries. Thank you for coming today because what we have to talk about is really important. All right? Workshop objectives. My goals are to get you to grow familiar with and possess an awareness of student learning outcomes. It is to make you understand and develop an appreciation for our accrediting bodies' requirements, which include SLOs, on course syllabi. And I have a link there to NWCCU where you can read all about that if you want, and share with you my pedagogical expertise. And the list is long and distinguished. Sorry, I can't keep that up with a straight face. This is an Alec Baldwin style introduction from Glengarry Glen Ross. Has anyone seen it? Oh my goodness. Only one. Anyways, he shows up in the movie for 8 minutes and has one monologue and then leaves, but it's an epic performance. He says, always be closing to the salesman, always be slowing. However, he says, the good news is you're fired. The bad news is you have just this semester to start using student learning outcomes to get your job back. No, we're not doing that. And he also says, look at this watch. It's worth more than your car, man, he says to Ed Harris's character. Anyways, I think I got this for $50 10 years ago at J. Crew on a post-Christmas sale. The bands are like $3.99 off of Amazon, so yeah. So I can't really pull that off. But no, that introduction was terrible, right? I told you all about my objectives, what I want you to do, and I'll show you that was pretty terrible language not just offensive language, but language that really isn't that conducive to learning. And remember, usually your course objectives are on the first page of your syllabus, and you go over them your first day. And so student learning outcomes, I think, whether I convince you or not of using them, it's not even about the fact, it is true that our accrediting body does demand them, so we should. But I'm not even going to really go into that. I have the link. If you want to look it up, that's fine. But I think just starting a better, maybe pedagogical culture, more conducive to student learning, would just maybe be convinced on student learning outcomes on the merits. So let's try that again. Hi. I'm Zac Gershberg. I'm an associate professor of journalism and media studies. I've been here at ISU for 6 years now. Before that, I bounced around and taught a few different places after finishing grad school. I did spend 3 years in the Cal State system, which is under WASC, one of the more rigorous accrediting bodies in the country. And one of the things when I got to Cal State Stanislaus, I was very surprised. There was, this assessment stuff we started having to do, and these workshops, like, oh my goodness. And so I had major internal resistance. Like, this is a pain, right? And external resistance. I don't have the time to do this sort of stuff. But doing some faculty development workshops there and things like that really convinced me and got me to start using student learning outcomes. It's not just about what ends up on the first page of your syllabus. It's how you end up aligning your course, end up scheduling your course, choosing reading materials. And so I've had, since I've left California and came here, I think a really strong relationship with students and some pretty popular classes that have been able to grow enrollment at a time when enrollment hasn't been growing as much as we would sometimes like. So at any rate, so let's look at what workshop outcomes might be. Okay, so attendees, not my goals, and it's fine if you have course objectives, but understand those are for you as an instructor, and that's good to have. And I would suggest that those typically should be clear in maybe the course description, which typically is the thing that goes above objectives or learning outcomes. The other thing, even before I get to this, is there is some research you see out there, student learning objectives, right? Which I think kind of confuses matters a little bit, right? Because we've had course objectives for just the longest time. And so student learning outcomes, I think, makes it a little bit more student-centered. So even if you have student learning objectives that are written in just the same way, this is an opportunity for us as faculty to share with what we want students to do. And so they're at the center of that first 20 minutes or whatever it is when you go over this in a class. And so it's not about my goals as a disciplinary expert. This is about what students, or in this case, attendees, should be able to adopt student learning outcomes for their courses and syllabi, create effective student learning outcomes that employ operational verbs, preview assignments, and can be assessed, and convince your college department unit colleagues to use course and program outcome statements. So we're going to come back to these at the end, but one is just as a matter of kind of just competency. An outcome should be, even if you do them poorly, just do them. I mean, so that's just like the first thing. And the second would be we're going to go through and have some exercises here on how to create effective student learning outcomes. And we'll go over operational verbs, how SLOs can preview assignments, and importantly, that it can lead to assessment. And I know we have kind of a new sort of assessment kind of movement in the university, Ann Heckert, right, is involved. But like one of the things, and I think my initial resistance way back when I first got introduced to this stuff, I mean, it was like, I got enough to worry about, right? And it just felt like it was an unfunded mandate being put on us faculty. And so there sometimes is like, how do we communicate kind of and wipe away the bureaucraties in some ways? And so these are kind of 3 outcomes, and obviously this one is going to be a little bit more aspirational. But the other thing I will say is the difference, not only is it more conducive to maybe a kinder opening initial orientation between a faculty member and their students, but it also places some responsibility on the instructor, right? Those course objectives I put up, that was, right, all dumped on you, right? My just gratuitous brilliance is just going to somehow rub off on all of you. And if you don't get it, well, too bad, right? And so I think sometimes course objectives, students will tune them out because, oh, that's great that you have these objectives, right? And so let's look at those again. Get you to grow familiar. How could we assess someone growing familiar with student learning outcomes? So we're going to look at some bad uses of language as well here today. To grow familiar and to possess an awareness. I mean, I guess this makes sense if you're teaching. I don't see no one teaches philosophy in here. Because if you were like getting deep into existential consciousness or something, I think it would make sense to really examine how to possess an awareness of something, right? I'm going to make you understand. Well, first of all, the implications of that are just like appalling, right? But more so, make you understand, right? I mean, and not everyone does this poorly, right? Make you understand, develop an appreciation for. And this is the other thing about the difference between objectives and outcomes and using effective language, right? Automatically, when you say, I want students to develop an appreciation for my subject matter, that is a complete abdication of responsibility, right? It's guilt, but it's also putting all of the responsibility on the students. And I think it's important, student learning outcomes, my guess is, and maybe this was the real reason for my own resistance once upon a time as a faculty member, was using outcomes ends up making me as an instructor or me delivering this workshop, responsible, right? And again, we know certain levels of student resistance. Karen and I were just at a workshop, a conference that went into this, and there's different types of student resistance, and maybe there's external issues going on in the lives of students where they just don't end up being able to do the work, right? They can't get it done. But if they are coming to class, if they are trying to do the assignments, there's a responsibility here, and that can be a little scary, right? I'm responsible for helping you accomplish this, right? And that fundamentally reorients, I think, the instructor-student relationship in a really healthy way, but there is a little nervousness there, right? You're putting yourself out there. You're being thrown in some ways into a relationship with that student where they have responsibilities and you have responsibilities. And then, again, it's not just our gratuitous brilliance as faculty rubbing off by osmosis or any other possible way, all right? So again, and we'll look at some of these words in a little bit here. And so I think just as a basic level of my goal doesn't matter or shouldn't matter, because it's about ultimately what you're able to do coming out of this. But my hope would be that we at least consider using student learning outcomes, all right? So why student learning outcomes? Well, I think as statements, they communicate what students can do and how, right? And so what we're doing is we're not just saying, well, when it comes to faculty teaching students in an institution of higher education, that it's 95% content and then 5% assignments, assessments, what have you, right? And this is how I'm going to try to get to the end here, is like how might we create courses that achieve some sense of balance. So student learning outcomes are kind of nice because they communicate clearly, in an ideal sense, what students can do and how. They also reveal competencies, proficiencies, and growth that students can expect to achieve from, again, not just the course content that you lecture about, but ultimately what the students are able to do through whether those assessments are tests, papers, running experiments, collecting data, creating artwork, whatever it is. And so I think just as a sort of best practice, really thinking about what do we want our students, all students in our classes, to be competent at. And then, you know, if they can become proficient, that would be amazing. But recognizing that there is a difference between competency and proficiency. So we'll circle back to that a little bit later. And then with all students, I would say we want growth, right? I mean, that's kind of important, that there's some movement that they experience as a learner, right? I mean, even if they end up getting a C in the class, right? And maybe just barely get to that level of competence or even comes up close. I mean, if they improve, that's something. So when we look at student learning outcomes, where are we looking for competency? Where are we looking for proficiency? And with all students, where are we looking for growth? And then the other, and this is, I think, in some ways, the main benefit. I mean, the thing that really opened up student learning outcomes in this world of assessment for me was that it really helps when it comes to course design. And one of the problems is, as faculty, we're often busy, anyone in education is, but sometimes you throw together a syllabus right before the semester, right? And that you figure it out as you go along, right? And that sometimes just happens. I always think of, in the film The Departed with Jack Nicholson and Leonardo DiCaprio, he says to him at one point, he goes, there's certain guys you can't touch, and that guy you just beat up, he's close to that. He's not that, but you should ask permission first. And what I would say is how this applies to syllabi and course design. There's certain things during the semester that you can create on the fly. But there's certain things you shouldn't, that you should have mapped out. All right? Creating a lecture, if you need to do that the day before or, in some cases, the morning of, that happens, right? You need to create an assignment sheet or a rubric. Yeah, that's fine. But knowing what your assignments are, knowing your schedule, knowing your student learning outcomes, and the one thing I'll talk about is how creating a sort of a really nice course alignment kind of lets you organize things really cleanly, effectively, And it gives you that time to know what you can or have to create on the fly and what you don't. Because those are sometimes the trade-offs. I mean, if you're trying to figure out your grading schematic and what assignments there will even be, that doesn't help. And that's a big change. I mean, I know when I was an undergraduate, 20 some odd years ago, I mean, it was just, you had a syllabus with contact information, and it was kind of like, hey, you know, it could be like in March. Now, in 2 weeks, we got a 10-page paper, and that was it. It was fine. But now with course learning software and kind of, I think, student expectations, and I also think this reflects kind of looking at the cultural pedagogy of ISU. I'm speaking now mostly in terms of undergraduate students. I think having a nicely organized course in terms of the schedule, both on the syllabus and Moodle, I think really helps. So, okay. Let's break out a little bit here. We do have some marker boards. I'm curious, why do we teach? I have my own answers, my own short, concise answer, but I want you to talk as a table, write some things down, and if you can, use the marker boards. I can bring one over here. But before you write on the marker board, actually talk it out. Scribble some things down. So if you need to take a moment, write your own thing, and then share it with your colleagues at your table. We also have some delicious, like, fruit-infused water. It's like the lobby of a W hotel in here. And it's very impressive. If you guys want to use that one, I know it's
That's also like what do you think about it? And for me, I think there's like, you know, you're like, how do we get people to do this thing? Like that worked out this way, you know. So there's definitely like a sort of experimental. Yeah. What happens in this structure? It's a little experiment before. Well-intentioned experiment. We have whiteboard markers.
yeah, there's. Yeah.
Or way to think about.
Yeah, or way to think, yeah. It's the guiding.
It's like there's something important about the world, and that it's valuable. want people to feel like they can understand. I don't ever tend to say they are capable of arriving how rarely realize.
I always forget what I'm actually
That's also as I see like 3 levels. Like one is sort of like the external, like we think the world has things that we want to connect people to and facilitate that thinking. One is like at least for me, is like what do people think about this? How do they apply it to their life? And then there's sort of like one. There's something important we want people to think about. Facilitating, empowering, ways of knowing. And something about something important. Yeah. And then how about something about like what do people think about this thing, or like how do people?
Similar why you might go and have a conversation.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, well, the Tuesday.
Yeah. Whiteboard envy. Well, it's not really envy because it's a reality. I just don't have
I don't think it crosses our distance.
That would be hilarious. What's the one more word? Knowing, curiosity, and engaging, or ways of knowing, curiosity, and thinking.
Just a second ago, that's
Or
All right, how we doing? Need another minute, 90 seconds? All right, 2 minutes.
instructing. I kind of like
Something that's like, I mean, it's not just saying that knowing is active, but that's like, there's an agency. I think it's safe to know.
yeah, I like instructing.
Should I use the mics because no one's over there, or you're recording? You should. Okay, that makes sense. All right, thank you. All right, we're about there. Okay, does one representative from each group, I don't know with everything going on, should I pass this around? Does a rep from each table want to just come up and read theirs?
You decide.
Would that be okay? I mean, I have this mic, so I don't, great. Come on up. Yeah, so you could just speak into it. Or, yeah, that's fine.
right? So I'll just come over here.
Okay.
So these are some of the thoughts that we had when we talked together as a group, and then some of the things that we saw. So we had things as far as seeing growth, the light bulb moment when you see that in your students, sharing info, again, kind of with learning together, being able to problem solve, finding new approaches with your students, and then sparking interest. So those were a couple of the things that we saw of why we like teaching.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Excellent. Y'all want to go?
Hello. Ours is right over there. And first, we sort of have an external factor, like there's something that we think is really important about the world or with the world, and we want to facilitate and empower like ways of knowing, curiosity, and constructing ideas about that thing that we think is important with our students. Another is maybe more internal to the students, like generally, how do people think about this thing and connect it with this thing? And you know, they're just interesting conversations around that thing that impacts their lives. Or all of our lives. And third, we just said it's a game we like it's an experiment, a structure to guide people with. And so there's a lot of sort of like, try this and what happens? You know, did that get at what I thought it was going to get at? Or what did it get at? That was, I didn't even know. So there's definitely also, I think, an excitement factor for us when it comes to teaching.
Okay. Who wins, the instructor or the students?
It's not that kind of game, my friend.
Okay. It's the intrinsic value of the sport. Okay.
You, all you.
Yes.
Dang it. All right, we said that we have a passion for our students and a passion with the material, and we want to share that too. So yeah, kind of like what other people have said. It's fun. We like doing it. It's good to talk to students and watch them learn. We also like to learn too. And so making the connections between things that maybe we haven't realized before, when students ask questions that we haven't thought of before, that just is a way for us to grow. And then the problem solving aspect of it, like how can I make this lecture like just perfect so it hits somebody in the face and they get it. That's what we like. So not so much that we care about the, yeah, that's what we talk about, yeah. Do you want to share your adrenaline?
I can. Okay. I was identifying plants on a field trip for a student, and I was getting really excited about all the different plants that we were finding just right up on Red Hill. And one of the students they were kind of making fun of me. They were like, "Do you have an adrenaline rush right now?" And they all kind of snickered. And I was like, "Hey, this is actually really cool."
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we didn't write on the board because there were 5 groups and 4 boards. So, but some of the things that we talked about is just to give the next generation a future, because we know that part is important, and to support the development of critical problem solvers. Because, I mean, take what we're experiencing right now and the ability to weed through what is static noise versus what's actual, real factual pieces that we need to be paying attention to.
It's a really good way to consider my workshop. What we're experiencing right now, all the static, but maybe some facts just float to the top.
Yes, right. So how do you cut through the static? Plus, there's that altruism that's just kind of embedded in it. Okay. And teaching, you know, we teach so that people can learn how to learn, so that then they can keep learning.
And just on top of that too, professional skills. One of the things I love to teach students in class is this assignment's going to help you be a better professional for X, Y, and Z reasons, so they see that connection too. I like that.
Cool.
Thanks. So a lot of the things that you've already said is in here. Our first one is that we like to see students grow, and then we like to participate in that growth as well. And we talked about growth in terms of, learning about what our subject matter, but also things like developing critical thinking skills, and so they learn more about, what we're teaching, but then also how to think and all of those things. And then our second was just the connection with students. Like, we like these people, and it's nice to have relationships and to connect with them in a variety of different ways and learn about them, and that then helps us learn and helps them learn. So we're always learning. Like, we learn a lot about our students and the things that they're facing and how they manage and those things, and that helps us as well. And then finally, we talked about encouraging our personal educational passions, because I was saying, like, these are, objectives that probably we all share, but why do I teach this and not statistics? And it's because I'm not passionate about statistics, but I am passionate about rhetoric, and so obviously that's why I teach that. So that our specific discipline matters, and we can have an adrenaline rush over plants or Aristotle, and it's cool. So.
Okay. Thank you. This is all very good. Let me turn this off. Okay. I did not expect look at all these sort of bullet points. This was really good. I'm very impressed. I just had, maybe this is like when I teach headline writing and stuff like that, to facilitate student learning. And in some ways, all of these bullets sort of, I think, can be achieved. Was that moving? But to facilitate student learning, just something, a really economical phrase like that, again, shifts the orientation, right? And I'm very much encouraged by all of this brainstorming, because no one wrote to share my gratuitous brilliance, right? Which is fine, and there's a lot of gratuitously brilliant people on this campus, which is also great. But why we teach is to facilitate student learning, to help students do something, whether that's just core professional skills, right? Or to ponder the universe or the cell biology of plants on Red Hill. So there's all of these different elements that go in there, right? But it's not I teach because I'm knowledgeable. It's I teach to facilitate student learning. And so if we see it in terms of that, so this is just kind of an umbrella phrase to allow us to think about how we can take all of this good stuff and really marshal that into a curriculum. And so I mean, this is kind of a little bit of it's not a sly trick, but it's about how do we shift the register where there's this sort of divide. In that it's ultimately a collaborative process, right? And that's very different from if I asked, why do we do research? That's a very different question, right? Who wants to take a stab at it? Why do we do research? As faculty, as grad students, as a corporation, why do we do research? Yeah.
I think to test ideas we have and also
Okay.
understand the problem.
Okay. Yeah. Understand a problem, test ideas. Yep. Contribute to the body of knowledge, right? Yeah, like advanced knowledge, I sometimes hear. Right? Okay. Anyone else? Those are good ones. Yep. So someone else can teach it. Well,
I do research, so I can find something else, and someone else can go teach what I just found out.
right. Let someone else facilitate all this learning. Let them read my research. So, is that Buggy? Okay. All right. Okay. So this is good. All right. Yeah. No. I mean, I just want to point out that is a bit of a different process, right? And how we do research ourselves, or how we collaborate on research, that's going to be a different process than the teaching process. One of the things, as a couple of my colleagues are here, no, I'm frustrated by it, and I know we have some grad students here, but at almost every academic department, when they do a job search, at every university, what's the question that inevitably comes up? How does what? How does your research inform your teaching? And I remember having to answer it myself, and I always think, and sometimes they'll ask this without ever even asking for a teaching philosophy or a teaching demonstration. I mean, and that shocks me. I mean, it's sometimes, and it's rote at this point, where it's just an expected question that search committees ask and job candidates answer. But at the same time, I'll be really impressed. I never was able to do it. And if I ever go on the job market, maybe I'll do this. But is to reject the premise of the question. Is to say, yes, I have all this disciplinary expertise, but my teaching is something fundamentally different. I share that, but my goal is to facilitate student learning and help students and facilitate students' ability to accomplish something or do X, Y, and Z. And so anyways, that's sometimes just a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. So it's not that our research doesn't at all inform our teaching, but when that's the only question that's asked about pedagogy to a job candidate, whew, right? And this also speaks to the academic job market in general. What do job candidates, when a department does have a teaching demonstration, what do they have them do?
Report on the research.
Well, they do a report on the research, or at least in our department, we have them do a research demonstration and then a teaching demonstration. But what is that teaching demonstration? It's usually just a lecture, right? Which is fine. That's good to see the rapport between educators and students and stuff like that. But it shows that that's how we think in terms of how to assess someone's pedagogical abilities, right? Whereas in some ways, and I think this was, if I learned sort of anything being in the Cal State system, is this stuff kind of came sort of 8 to 10 years kind of before I feel like it's starting to come to ISU's campus now for maybe a few different reasons, but the Northwest Commission is kind of on this, is kind of how much that maybe you can look at a syllabus and kind of evaluate the instructor. Now, you wouldn't want neither a lecture nor a syllabus tells you everything you need to know about someone as an educator. And my point is, where I'm trying to get to is this sense of balance, right? Balance and structure and clear outcomes. So, okay, so kind of doing all this, some of you may have looked at this before. Some of the ideas behind student learning outcomes goes, there's this psychologist at the University of Chicago, Benjamin Bloom, and he and some of his colleagues looked at way back in the 1950s higher order levels of thinking, right? And so they created this pyramid, and so knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, evaluation. Now, the crazy thing about Bloom is, again, this was higher order levels of thinking. So evaluation was the top here. But kind of what made Bloom such a pedagogical savant in some ways is the fact that he used this cool pyramid. No, it wasn't the pyramid. It was actually, the categories themselves are, well, I'm going to go into critique the updated Bloom in a minute here. But the real value here was the sort of verbs that came with the taxonomy, right? Distinguish, recognize, classify, describe, list, identify, demonstrate, compose, produce, investigate, categorize, solve, illustrate. And there's like a whole sort of cottage industry, and we're going to be talking a lot about verbs here in a minute. And so this helped, especially faculty in higher ed, to see these as tools, right? And so they kind of started off as a best practice to use in course objectives. But then as people got more serious about student learning outcomes, in 2001, Lauren Anderson and his colleagues created an update to Bloom's. So sometimes now when you search for Bloom's taxonomy, you actually see these, even though it's the update that Bloom didn't do. And what they did was they changed the taxonomy from nouns, right, to verbs in terms of the pyramid itself. Remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create. And then there's, I mean, again, verbs that go with it, a little definition here. And so how many people are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, whether the original or the update? Right, okay. So I got some issues with this. I mean, one, it becomes this kind of, right, as a pyramid, it's like, oh, well, if I'm teaching a gen ed level class, I'll just do this and maybe this. And if I get to apply, maybe, but that's it, right? And then it's like, oh, if I'm teaching a graduate seminar, I shall have them create. Right? It becomes this, the hierarchy itself. But again, the real value here all along, and I feel like most people in education who are familiar with it recognize that it's those verbs that are actually really helpful in thinking about this. But I think as a hierarchical pyramid of, I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, maybe it is higher level thinking, but, and I say this as a psychologist walks in, but there is something I notice about this. I think it's a little silly that there's 6 of these. I think it's a little bit of a cop-out. I don't know. I don't know the pedagogical scholarship and literature as well as maybe some of you here, but so I don't know if anyone's made this point before, but what do you know, like what, I mean, as a hierarchy, what, not even the verbs on the right, just the 6. Do you notice anything? Could you group them in particular ways that it just, yes?
Well, I was just going to say, a lot of times in like the science education literature, they're grouped into higher and lower level order of thinking, and that
Right.
is not really like, that is sort of hierarchical, but that is sort of like the idea is that you pull from both.
Okay.
So you're not really
Right.
just supposed to be like,
They're not mutually exclusive from one another.
and like,
Right.
you're not supposed to be like, oh, this is a, introductory level course, so I'm just going to do lower level thinking. The idea is that you would want to have a spread, but that you also wouldn't want to just have higher order thinking. That,
Right.
like,
Okay.
I don't know what you're getting at exactly.
Okay, it's okay. I'm not fishing for anything in particular. Anyone else notice anything just looking at it? No? Yeah?
Maybe the weightings, like the pyramid suggests you should have a lot of the remember and not so much of the create.
Okay. Yeah. That's another good way to put it, right? Yeah. Right, and in terms of journalism, we like the inverted pyramid, so I'd flip this over. No, but actually my issue with it is that, okay, remember and understand. I mean, that's obviously something of a pairing, right? And I think when you talk about analyze and evaluate, I mean, again, I think the verbs are very helpful, but right, it seems as, and apply, it does seem like create may just be a higher order of applying. So having the 6, I think if they were really going to update it, they could have gotten rid of the triangle or the pyramid, and then maybe grouped it in 3. I don't know. What do you think? Do you see those? I mean, I see kind of 3 pairings here, and I think they lost their nerve. Because they get, when you search Bloom's taxonomy, the update tends to show up, not the original. And so it was a highly effective move from that perspective. They got to keep Bloom's taxonomy, right? They didn't go in for radical surgery. But okay, all right, I'll give it a go. So, or I should have called it Gershberg 2020, you know. Well, or 2021, we'll see. I get rid of the pyramid here. And you could tell me if this sucks or you don't buy it, that's fine. I kind of like to see, I imagine these as somehow like bouncy yoga balls, just sort of comfortably resting on one another. And so I think verbs are really important, and I want to come back to verbs. But I've chosen nouns, two of which you can transform into a verb. But content is just this sort of base. Every course, we've talked about this, right? This is where the gratuitous brilliance comes in, where I, disciplinary expert, will teach you the content, right? Like so, but there's always going to be some level of content, right? And I think content is a very 21st century word, right? Content is king. You know, the online world is just full of content, but that's also, you know, I think it connects, students understand content. And then connection, which is another sort of, I'm using some 21st century buzzwords here, so I'm not above shameless self-promotion myself. But so if content is the stuff, the disciplinary knowledge that comes from readings, which comes from the expertise of the instructor, right? The stuff that, you know, again, stuff you have to teach, in other words. But connections, what would connections be? Or is it unfair of me to ask you, since I came up with this stuff?
Connections, why the content's important to the student.
Okay, yeah. Connections within the student. I think also connections from the content to previous knowledge. Connections between course content and maybe going to research, right? To look at the literature beyond that as a task. So this is where some of maybe the critical thinking, identifying arguments, right? Collaborating with other students about the content. So I think connection gives us a sense where we're doing something with the content itself. You know, with content, you can kind of assess that through quizzes and tests and stuff like that. But if you're going to assess connections, right, rather than just call it critical thinking skills and stuff like that. But that's, I think, definitely part of it. But I think connection gives us room to connect, right, the context of content, to connect with other people about it, right? And so even getting into those levels of metacognition in some ways about the subject area. And then craft. I like this. I think it's because my 5-year-old loves to do crafts. So I think that's maybe part of it. But right, like we love, you know, to do craft projects when we're young. But also what we do as faculty or as grad students or anyone doing anything in any discipline, it's ultimately a craft, right? Researching, writing, collecting data, I mean, that's a craft. And also then delivering whatever outcome that is. You have to craft it in some particular way as an oral presentation, as a white paper, as a long research paper, a thesis, a dissertation, designing a billboard for an advertising class, right? Designing an experiment, proposing a business plan. I think of the health professions, administering a diagnostic exam, right? That's craft. So I also was looking to keep 3 C words, you know. The alliteration I'm just like really into right now. So that's part of it too. So content, connection, and craft. And the subject of, if we're all here on campus in April, of my next workshop will actually be, do you see this like this little thing where all 3 come together? So actually that's kind of what I'm hoping to go over when you can hit that little sweet spot. Because sometimes in certain courses, right, I would say you should never have a course that's just straight content. That's just straight, here are all my lectures from the textbook. There are 2 exams. Though, I mean, I remember, like I used to take, do we have courses like that? Like, yeah, we do? Okay. Well, all right, I mean, that's something, but it's difficult, right? There are labor issues that go into that, right? In terms of if you have a course with several hundred people, right? That's the best way you can handle that. But so I think you should have at least one other element in there to be assessed, because I think that's also just a best practice in terms of pedagogy, in terms of making sure that students, and I don't know how much research we have on kind of ISU students or things like that. I know one thing at my Cal State campus is they found out that students learned best, and I think you could probably extrapolate this everywhere, from a certain variety of assignments. Because if the course is just 3 exams staggered throughout, and they do poorly on the first exam, they can get frustrated and say, oh, I'm just going to fail anyway, right? And so, again, there are certain labor and time-sensitive issues that go in to having some variety. So I don't think in every class you need to have, can't always have this perfect sweet spot where you're getting sort of all of that. But I think in terms of best practices for pedagogy, having a sort of balance. Yep, Karen.
I really like that. And what's interesting, the term craft, I think you're thinking of that as create, which that makes you craft something, but it's also my craft.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like, here's the content. I just came from my senior capstone. So that's what I'm thinking.
Right, yeah.
But there's the content, and I'm making this connection. I think students learn so well when they can connect it to what I'm going to do. So that there might be sort of a double
I think so.
meaning there. Like
Absolutely.
And a connection with my craft.
Yeah.
So that's cool. Oh, there's another secret for you.
Yeah. No, I think absolutely. And I think it's important as instructors to share with our students, you know, right before you go over those SLOs on that first day, here's who I am, here's what I study, but here's what we are going to do, right? And that is, it's not about sharing your expertise, it's about sharing your craft, right? And again, that means something different if you're a rhetorician or a biologist, right? Or a psychologist, or even a lowly, vulgar journalism professor like myself. But I also, maybe because I'm not a really great design person, and I couldn't figure these out, but I like how they got kind of like these plump circles. It's like, I just imagine them sort of at rest. I wanted to make it nice and big so it wasn't too close, but it didn't work out. But then I began to embrace it in some ways. Okay, so I have a link here, and Karen, we're going to post this on the Pi website. This was something that was sent out. It was linked to as part of a long list of links that came from part of what Anne's doing with assessment. Anyways, Clifford Edelman was this long time. Has anyone ever heard of him? He was a long time, he worked at the U.S. Department of Education and then the Institute of Higher Learning, but just one of the more influential and powerful kind of thinkers about higher education. He passed away just a couple years ago. And so he has this great white paper that this is drawn from that's just about really thinking about verbs. And he has a slight critique in a different way of Bloom, but he has this phrase, this sentence: the verb is the center, fulcrum, engine of a learning outcome statement. It helps to remember that verbs refer to events, not to states, and events are specific actions, in this case, by the student. And so he's also a terrifically funny writer in some ways, and it's like, it's not always the easiest to slog through, you know, pedagogical scholarship. But at the same time, I think he makes it delightful and whimsical in some ways because he's also like a bit snarky, but really thinking about verbs here. And again, that, to go back to Bloom, it wasn't even so much the taxonomy or the pyramid, it was just all of these verbs that we had access to. And so Adelman's thing is, here are the verbs that are helpful, and here are the verb, and we're going to get to that in the next slide, but the verb is the center fulcrum engine of the learning outcome. And I think this is difficult. This is where we get to maybe faculty resistance in some ways. It's really hard to think about, to define your teaching as a function of facilitating student learning, right? Because what you're doing is you're then saying, hey, your expertise, your body of research is awesome, but you have this other responsibility. It's not just to share that disciplinary knowledge. It's that responsibility to facilitate learning and do all of these things, right? And so the verb is the center of that process because you have to articulate then what specifically students are going to be able to do. And this is where you're calling your shot, right? And on a rec basketball, in a rec basketball game, or like Babe Ruth, right? Pointing his bat before he hit the home run, right? That's can be a little bit scary, right? Because, man, Babe Ruth, what if he struck out? I mean, he'd still be Babe Ruth, I guess, which is pretty cool, right? Or I know on the basketball court, I've gotten to the point where I still play a little bit, but it's hard because students always stay the same age, and I just keep getting older out there. But like one of the things you do if you're feeling confident, as you shoot it, you say bucket, right? Or splash or something like that, and then run down the court, not even looking to see if it goes in. It's a really rude, obnoxious thing to do. But if you're feeling it, call your shot. And so, but here's the thing. Calling your shot with SLOs takes a certain amount of confidence, but it also is accompanied by a great deal of responsibility that can be a little bit scary. But I would say something that showed up on each of these boards is the excitement, right? And that there's something that happens in that process that's exciting, right? If students are just a dumping ground for your gratuitous brilliance, that's not, I mean, that may be exciting to you. It's like somehow it'll just rub off on a couple of them, right? What's exciting is student learning outcomes provide this sort of, it's really calling your shot. Saying, my job is to facilitate your ability to do these specific things, expressed in verbs, right? And again, there are, right, accepting all the external factors if a student has to withdraw for health issues or economic issues, things like, I mean, those things certainly happen. And we're talking about the broad class of students who are able, and some students, this also can be very liberating, right? A student misses one class or one quiz or something like that. The question, I think, is, and I know we're having, right, some issues with students ghosting, right? Has anyone had that? Students ghosting? I mean, it can be difficult. The question is, does that frustrate us because they're missing course content? Or does it frustrate us because they're not going to be able to accomplish the SLOs, right? What can we do to help facilitate their ability to achieve those or not? I mean, and again, our priority is the SLOs. If they miss a bunch of courses and lose points on your lateness policy and miss certain assignments, look, they're going to have to deal with that. But I think it also helps improve that relationship between the instructor and the student. If you don't express, hey, you're going to fail this course, right? Start coming to class, right? But you should want, ideally, that student has an opportunity to, regardless of the grade, meet those or be able to demonstrate those student learning outcomes. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion in some ways that I kind of wedged in here. That's a little harder to have, but the verb is central. So let's look at some verbs. And it's about 25 pages long. It's really funny and interesting. So the link is on the other end. So he talks about the importance of operational verbs, not just active verbs. So there's a whole slew, and he has more of these, and he has 20 categories. And I've chosen just a selection of verbs from the 20 categories. But what his point is, not any active verb will do. But words like access, administer, advocate, appraise, audit, budget, calculate, campaign, collate, collect, conduct, coordinate, create, debate, define, design, diagnose, encode, decode, exhibit, formulate, identify, implement, investigate, list, map, measure, model, observe, operate, optimize, plan, present, rank, review, simulate, solve, sort, summarize, test, translate. Again, this is just a sampling of the 20 categories. Why are these all operational verbs? What makes them operational? What do you think that means? They're doing something. Yeah. So that's the first part, yeah. They're doing something. And the second part is you can actually assess how they're doing it. So it's important that they're doing something, and then it's important that you can assess how they're doing it, right? And these are all not just operational, but external things. Things that can be done, performed, expressed externally in the world, on a paper, in a presentation, right? There's something that the students are doing, but even more so that they have actually something to show, right?
Are some of them indeterminate though, like investigate? I mean, you can investigate for 100 years, so how would you know?
Yeah.
Right, you can investigate something forever, really. How would you know that the student has, completed that?
Okay. That's, I think, a fair critique. Yeah, do you have a response to that?
I think like in a science class, you could ask them to design, maybe this is a different, but like investigate. They could come up with like a research question and design an experiment, or like you could say investigate, like, you could have them write an essay on a question, and they have to pull in resources that like they've investigated that question, not just like, or it could be reflective.
Yeah. I agree. I think that's a good point.
We have in some of our general ed physics labs an investigation that they were given a topic, a set of materials, and told to investigate something about that topic.
Okay.
For the period of the
And then how does that look? How is that, like, what do they do and how is it assessed?
They have to find a scientific method to a hypothesis that they develop on their own.
Okay. So they're hypothesizing in that way. Okay.
They design an experiment to
Yeah.
test it, all of it.
Right. Yep.
I think with this verb, investigate, right? I mean, if you think of a private eye, right, and an investigator, right, they have to find evidence, right? And so with their experiment, they have to see and recognize the evidence, right?
Yeah.
They have to make note of it, and so that's how you assess. They
And
have to
determine
have
whether or not it's supporting.
So one thing is, Edelman's white paper is about how operational verbs are paramount, right? I showed you that quote before. Then he says, they're nothing without the intuitive nouns that accompany them, right? So I think you're right to bring that up, because just looking at with some of these, they're sort of meta in the sense that you could automatically see what that would look like, but with investigate, maybe that's not. Does that mean a series of reports or a particular type of hypothesis or conclusion or something like that? Is it a paper? Is it a presentation? And so I think with all of these, and as we keep going here. A student learning outcome is going to have an operational verb, but it's going to be accompanied by something that exists, that the student does or can show for it. But go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I see these as sort of in contrast with things like think and understand.
You mean that?
Oh, okay.
No. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, right? And that's what Edelman is trying to do. And this notion of verbs that express an internal state, to think, to understand, right? And in some ways, so what do we do with this? Because I think this is always the sticking point with faculty and educators in trying to figure out how to incorporate some of this assessment language, student learning outcomes, right? Is those bottom levels of understand, remember. I mean, you're talking about that sometimes the identity. Most professors, at least, their identity is their disciplinary knowledge and expertise, right, in terms of their research output. And it's like, you're going to tell me I can't tell my students to think or to understand? What they tell Picasso, no brush? Like, right? I mean, and so ability, appreciate, awareness, capacity, comply, consider, develop, knowledge. And I think develop is a little bizarre. At least in Edelman's piece, he has develop in both. So I mean, he's like the mob boss. Hey, there's certain times you can use develop, and there's certain times you can't. You're close to one of those instances where you can't use it, but it's okay for now. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think like back to the question on investigate is like if you're using one, you should have a way to assess it. And so, like, if you don't have a way to assess if your students have thought about something, you know, then it's not really.
Right. Well, not only that, like one operational verb he doesn't use that, I mean, I'm always interested in, okay, how can we tease this logic out to the end of the line here? I mean, basically, just my own interpretation of Edelman's work is kind of, okay, well, hey, if you're a faculty member and you want to tell students, your outcome is you're going to regurgitate all this factual information on whatever discipline it is on a test. That's at least honest and responsible. Like that, in some ways, is more honest than saying, I want you to possess an awareness and grow familiar with appreciation for this body of work. Oh, sorry, Anna, did you have your hand up?
Well, I was just going to say, in terms of develop, like, you can differentiate it between developing understanding versus developing a model. I would see that as two different ways to develop.
Right.
One, developing understanding, less helpful, developing a model,
Yeah.
is that simple.
Because again, with these, this is important and I think is the building block, but then it's also what comes next, right? Because that's where you can write SLOs that really preview the assignments that allow for a sense of, okay, we can really assess student learning here, right? This faculty member literally just wants them to regurgitate information. Right? I mean, if that's the outcome, we should say it. So there's also, I really like, in terms of student learning outcomes, Wiggins and, does anyone know how to pronounce that other person? Is it McTighe? McTee. You know, they wrote this book in 1998, Understanding by Design, and now they have just tons of all these different resources and really the big thing that they came up with in their Understanding by Design book way back in 98 was this notion of backwards design that helps us get to course alignment. And this is where I think SLOs are really important, is that you can start with the outcomes themselves. Right? Typically, how do we start planning a course? Right? It's like, I'm this expert, I have this knowledge, and I found this textbook that this publisher sent me. All right, now I got to build the assignments and tests and quizzes around this book. So it helps for you, Nance, because you write your own books. So that's a little bit different, I guess. But in terms of outcomes, right? Then we can think about assignments and how that's assessed, right? The evidence that students do, or the work that students do, that provide evidence of reaching those outcomes. And then the sort of last step is like, okay, what materials am my students, what are they going to need? What lectures are they going to need? What reading materials are they going to need, right? But if typically, and I have to say for most of my career, it was the opposite. It was, man, I'm pretty good. And, I love this book, and this is what they're going to know, and I'm just going to test them about this information, right? And again, sometimes you have to do that. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't have textbooks. I'm not some crazy radical, like, no textbooks, no lectures, no quizzes or tests, though I do have some courses. I mean, just yesterday, I teach screenwriting as well. I have this book called Save the Cat. It's by a Hollywood screenwriter, and it has literally a cat dangling from a tree. And it's like, yes, my colleagues in philosophy, English teach literature, and here I am teaching Save the Cat. It's like, what act to introduce the villain in a movie? So at any rate, and I should say, in my defense, in terms of that book, he sold a screenplay for $1 million to Steven Spielberg called Nuclear Family, which was never even made into a movie. And he had to do a lot of research on nuclear engineering because this whole family, get it, a nuclear family, gets like, I don't know, exposed to nuclear radiation and gets superpowers. It's one of those, I mean, it's a stinging success story. To sell your script for $1 million and they don't even make it, which is actually kind of a better thing because then you don't have to see your dream thing totally ruined by a bunch of producers, directors, and actors and stuff like that. But anyways, so outcomes, assignment, instruction. But man, that's tough. I mean, that's reverse engineering the course, right? And the process we're typically used to. So Wiggins and McTee have this, so they talk about knowledge, right? And again, knowledge is one of those bad words, to the extent that we would say a bad word. But it's about what we do with knowledge, right? So again, I've been joking a little bit about disciplinary expertise and everything like that, but it's about how we transfer that. But the transfer process is not just me lecturing, me dumping all this, I'm dropping knowledge on you. It is the transfer is what students can do with it. And that is learning, right? It's not the transfer of knowledge from A to B. It's the transfer of knowledge that allows B to do something with it. So the transfer isn't between the instructor and the student. The transfer is when the student is able to do something with what they've learned. So that's why I have the popcorn quotes around transfer. Anyways, I have a link in the PowerPoint to one of their online kind of a breakdown of what this sort of backwards design means. But I think for our purposes, when we look at student learning outcomes, how are we going to facilitate outcomes? Right? That becomes the big question. When we're conducting course design, really thinking about it, how are we going to facilitate outcomes? And so then our goal is not just to drop knowledge on the students, it's how do we build pathways for students to be able to do something. We only achieve transfer when students are able to do something with it. And so the course design becomes, how do I build those pathways? So again, disciplinary expertise plus reading materials. I'm not suggesting we need to eliminate them, anything like that. But I guess my point would be that should come last rather than first. But I know there's some situations, as instructors, we get into, hey, this is the textbook we use, right? I mean, do you all have a common textbook for like intro to biology? Yeah, I mean, in some courses, and that is totally understandable. So then the question is, that's kind of nice. That's done. I mean, so you don't necessarily have to worry about it. But that doesn't mean every course should be taught the same way. But then it becomes, okay, what are the outcomes? And I would say for a big gen ed type course, it's more important for a department to really consider what those outcomes are than to even have a common text. I understand why we have common text, and that's all good and everything like that, and it makes sense. But I would say, pedagogically speaking, it's more important to have very consistent student learning outcomes, or if everyone's going to be allowed to do their own outcomes, then that should be, you know, reviewed, considered, supported in different ways. Okay, really quickly here, this is old syllabus of mine. I'm curious, who can spot an error? So I just wanted to provide the description so you'd see it, but in terms of the student learning outcomes, this is just an introductory course we have in the CMP department. Who can?
Got a lot of those internal.
Okay. So familiarize, right? Familiarize themselves with the ethical and legal landscape of the news media. To be honest, I think it's an important task, but at the same time, it's not so good as a student learning outcome, right? Any others?
It's very much on the student as opposed to like things that you're going to sort of facilitate. Like, so they're going to require editing skills.
Okay, right, good. Develop is one of those words that kind of can go either way. And Edelman sometimes says acquires the same way. I mean, if you can assess it, it's sometimes okay. But, okay, how might we do this a little bit better? With familiarize. And this is something that, because I think when it comes to student learning outcomes, the fewer you have, the better, typically. But then you're talking about writing really strong sentences that are clear, have operational verbs, preview the assignment in some particular way, right? What could we do? Not knowing anything else about the course, just looking at these SLOs. Reduce the number, okay. But what could we do, specifically you pointed out, familiarize themselves with the ethical and legal landscape of the news media, right? This is such a good example of complete abdication of responsibility on the part of the instructor, right? This is on you to either just, you know, just catch my brilliance, right? Yes?
Sorry, I was catching your
Oh, okay. No.
I was thinking maybe familiarize. Maybe you could make that, I would make it into identify, and then
Okay.
you could align that to an assignment in which they actually had to read
Okay.
a case and then
Yeah.
identify what are the ethical, legal,
Okay.
identify the ethical.
Okay. Right? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean, recall and remember, I mean, I think the question is, how are those assessed? Multiple choice, okay. Then maybe we're back to identify, right? List, right? Explain, right?
Evaluate ethical, legal, landscape.
Evaluate, right? Okay. Well, like one of the things, just in terms of develop strong interviewing skills, at least when it comes to ethics, if they're going to be covering events, right? Might just be included in another SLO, right? To ethically cover events. And it's kind of weird. Edelman has a whole thing about whether you want adjectives and adverbs in there. Because then you're talking about those effective, right? Then you say, okay, you're going to become proficient at this, not just competent. Yep.
So you might also consider where you've listed all your assignments at the top, actually pulling them down. So, by reading this case study, you're going to write a paper.
Okay.
So that you're actually tying the assessment to the outcome. Because how you're going to assess each of these is going to be different because you're trying to get a different theme from them. When you present, you're looking for something different than writing a presentation, writing a report, which is going to be very different from having a discussion.
Yeah. That's a good point. And just like as an example, in terms of this course, I have right under this all the assignments. There's like one test in this course. They cover 5 public events as a reporter. But look at these bottom ones, write clear, effective press releases and generate broadcast copy by reporting, composing, delivering a radio story on the air. Those are very straightforward, and in some ways that almost feels counterintuitive. That's not necessarily a course objective, but that it's absolutely a student learning outcome. So I could put, cover and report on 5 public events in the community. Write 5 news stories, integrating, or conducting interviews, these sorts of things. So yeah, like sometimes student learning outcomes being just really straightforward, and as was just pointed out, right, like tying them specifically to assignments can be more helpful. Yeah. Okay, I want you to, and if you need to excuse yourself to go to the bathroom, get a drink of water or something, go ahead. But I don't want you to look at a previous syllabus or a current syllabus of yours. I want you to just write down, think of a class that you teach, or a class, maybe a course that you would like to teach. And I want this exercise to be, I want you to write down 3 outcomes for a course, and ideally, whether it's you teach it or someone else teaches it, and then you could compare it to your own objectives or outcomes after just listening to this, and then, or to someone else's course that you would like to teach at some point. So I don't know if it would, again, what do you want students to do? I think is this overriding thing here. But then also, I'd be happy to include these. But once again, write 3 student learning outcome statements for one particular course that you teach, or that you would like to teach, or that you could teach, or have taught, all right? And again, here are the operational verbs. Do you all TA, or do you teach intro sections? Okay, cool.
Everybody's developing an assessment right now in this course. Just finished
What course is it? Oh, assessment. Okay. That helps. Okay. Right. How am I doing? Is everyone critique? I didn't know that. I would have. And I would say don't try to think too hard. I mean, let it flow. Because I think one task we have is I've seen so many syllabi among my own colleagues and colleagues in other departments all across the university that still use like course objectives. So I think a good first step here is just, using student learning outcomes, right? And then obviously we want to move towards proficiency with operational verbs, intuitive nouns, and all those things to get that level where when we do these kind of assessment programs, they can be effective, but I think you have to crawl before you can walk. Okay, how we doing? Still need a minute? Yeah? Take a couple minutes? All right. We can maybe link to Edelman's white paper too, and there's like 3 pages in there where he goes over the 20 different categories and contexts in which to use it. And it's really great because it could be used like really effectively across the discipline. So I could even like point out what 3 pages they are. I actually have them printed out in my, and I always keep them with me. Is anyone using regurgitate as their operational verb? Again, I think it's more honest. I mean, let's be honest, if that's what we're doing here. Though regurgitate, I think there's something, right? Its original meaning doesn't really translate that well, right? It's like, oh my God, right? But it reminds me of, right? Friedrich Nietzsche once said, the public vomits and outspits a newspaper. So that's, that's kind of, of the many, critiques.
Spits.
Huh?
Spits, not spits out.
Or spits out. I don't know. The German translation is always probably a little In German, doesn't like the verb come last or something? Okay, yeah. Vomits up. I don't know. Okay, so who would like to read their set of SLOs? Who would like to share? And the one thing I would say, and this is actually an important point. This stuff over here, again, as I kind of started off today, the internal states, these sort of objective goals that you have as an instructor, those aren't bad. Those aren't wrong. I'm just suggesting we shouldn't lead with them in the first 15 minutes of a semester. Okay, like it is totally fine to say, my goal for this assignment is to get you to appreciate so-and-so. But you're saying you're taking responsibility then. You're not putting that burden, you're not putting that juju on the students, right? You're owning up to, this is what I would like, but here's what you can do. So again, it's an either or, but it's not as if, and when Edelman in his work breaks down the 20 categories, he actually uses some of these words when he introduces the category. So again, by itself, they're not wrong, but in terms of outcomes are what we want students to do. So who would like to read their set, or maybe just one? Yep. And what course is this for?
The LLIB Introduction to Information Research class.
Okay, great.
I like the verbs that are on there, so one of them I think that makes sense is collect 2 to 4 books that are relevant to your research question.
Collect 2, can you just say it one more time?
Collect 2 to 4 books that are relevant to your research question.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's...
I previously and have written find the relevant and current book in the library catalog.
Okay.
I don't know if collect is better, but find is...
Yeah.
That's also understandable for students.
I think collect is a nice operational verb, right? And the other thing is, too, think about, like, that by itself. I mean, that's a short, clean way. So I don't know, like, assignment-wise, do they just show up in class with these books? You know, because it could be collect 2 to 4 books for, what was it, the research question?
Yeah, that are relevant.
Are relevant to your research question. I mean, you could even have collect 2 to 4 books that is relevant to your research question, and justify your choices in a, I don't know, 2-page paper or something, or like a response paper or something like that. And then you have 2 levels of assessment, right? The books themselves you can assess, and then the justification. But having just that is fine, right? If it's clear enough. But like it's kind of like write a clear, effective press release. That was the shortest one on my thing. But it's a genuine thing that students should be able to do. If I'm doing my job, they'll be able to do that by the end of the semester. Right? And collecting 2 to 4 books, right? Is, I mean, it seems small, but that's actually perfectly reasonable. Like if that is, I mean, and especially if you start thinking about it in terms of backwards, and it just, I think also allows you to see your course in maybe a different light, right? Because it shifts up the register a little bit. Okay, who else would like to share? Yes?
This is for my groups and communication class. So implement effective discussion facilitation techniques.
Okay.
Everybody
say it one more time.
Sure. Implement effective discussion facilitation techniques.
Okay.
Uh-oh, I'm going to get last.
No, I want to know how this, how does this look?
The department chair suggests goes volunteers to do this.
It's all right. It's not like I'm calling you out on video. No. Yeah.
The downer part.
So describe to me what the student, like what is the assignment? Because you said it afterward.
In the class, there is an extended 3 or 4 day period where every student is assigned a particular portion of a discussion to lead. They have to prepare for that discussion and then implement the particular technique that's being used that day in the discussion.
Okay. So they are literally facilitating a group discussion.
Students in a discussion.
Okay. So.
I'm okay?
No. Just say that the students, the outcome is they can facilitate a discussion, right? They could put on their resume, I have facilitated group discussions, right? Because read originally what you had.
Well, I'm not going to read.
Come on, do it once more for us. This is helpful, yeah.
Right. Implement effective discussion facilitation techniques.
Yeah. Just say what they're going to do,
Well,
right?
Fine, all right.
You know? Because, right, like implement is sort of the, right, that's kind of, I mean, an implement can be a really strong operational verb.
Facilitate an effective group discussion.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. You know, I mean, you could have on the back end by implementing so-and-so's theory.
Right.
If you want to add that too. But what I would say is lead with the doing,
Okay.
the operation itself. Okay? Good. Who else? Yes.
Okay, so this is for a course I will be teaching as an internship and creating and teaching as an internship for biological illustration.
Oh, okay.
So the first one is gain skills in using illustration tools and techniques. The second one is investigate science topics through the lens of illustration. And the third is implement illustration as a scientific tool.
Okay. All right, can you read through them one more time for me?
Yeah. Gain skills in using illustration tools and techniques. Investigate science topics through the lens of illustration. And implement illustration as a scientific tool.
Okay. So I guess what we all want to know is, are they going to be drawing dinosaurs?
Not dinosaurs.
Okay, not dinosaurs.
Se,
Okay.
But
Okay.
plants, mammals, bugs, all
Okay.
kinds of things. Yes.
So are they doing this digitally or by hand?
As of now, they'll be doing it with traditional media like pencils.
Okay, okay. So, what you said on the back end there was they're going to be illustrating plants and mammals, right? Like, that in and of itself is a very clear, direct outcome, right? And then on the sort of back end of that sentence, if you want to say through, if there's names for these techniques or something like that, but the key outcome here is that they are going to not just create or implement tools they're going to illustrate plant and mammal life or flora and fauna. I don't know, is that an okay, right? This is what I mean. There's different levels of outcome statements. But just as a very clear basic thing, because remember, the audience isn't me here. Who is the audience? Students in those first 15 minutes of the semester, right?
But they'll be doing a little bit more than just drawing plants and animals, right?
Right, okay.
Looking at ecological processes and trying to illustrate those in diagrams and things like that.
Okay.
That's why I went with science topics, not just.
Okay. So plants, animals, ecological systems.
So, but is that,
right?
so this is something that I struggle with, is
Yeah.
that I'm a lister. So in my
Yeah.
original proposal that I'm writing for this class, I listed out every single topic that they're going to
Okay.
be. But
That's a good brainstorming technique, yeah.
so, but as I'm presenting this to the department chair, is that an efficient way of saying that, or should I truncate this? And students, are they going to stop reading after the first 2 items? So what's an effective way of listing all of these techniques?
Well, right, because those are two audiences. And the other issue, right, which I'm going to close here in a minute on, is having, and part of this, I know Karen's kind of done this with the PI program, is having a pedagogical culture where we can see illustrates plants, animals, and ecological process. It's like, what, that's it? And so I think as a first student learning outcome on the first page of a syllabus, that makes sense. But obviously there's going to be more depth to it, right? And if you want one that's identify the different graphic techniques of biological illustration, well, that suggests you may be reading and testing on a couple of different things before you get to that, right? I think there's, I know, because I was just up at the Darwin and dinosaur thing up in IF, the museum. It actually has some really cool, I didn't know like how there's all this controversy in the early 1800s on depictions of dinosaurs and stuff. So at any rate, I mean, that's a cool, very cool topic. So I mean, it could be something like review the controversies, or in the, at least what I was picking up on, the political ramifications, and that's where you could potentially suggest maybe have a short little paper or something, right? And that's where you get that variety. I mean, it's up to you how you want to do it, but this is what I mean. That makes us responsible for the assessments, right? Because it's an illustration course, and they are going to be illustrating and creating drawings of biological phenomena, but more so, right? They're going to be. It's a kind of a holistic look, and so what if you're interested in that course, but you've always been bad at drawing, right? But then there's like other elements. So, right. So I mean, I think get to its root core. I mean, and it's okay. Sometimes you don't want all that. So like in that media writing course, something we talk about is there a different way to write lead sentences, the first sentence in a story. It could be something that just teases the reader. It could be something that just summarizes everything. It's in a freight train sentence. So I think even having some maybe variety in your SLOs makes sense too. But yeah, I thought that was good. But don't be afraid of the very clear, basic, direct, this is what you're going to do. Because the course description is that's where my objectives, my goals, or in this case yours, will shine through. So you're already doing that to justify the course, right? And again, I'm not saying we shouldn't have objectives or goals that we share with our students. But when it comes to outcomes, we have to have something, or we should not have to have, we should have something where we say, hey, this is what you're going to be able to do coming out of this course. And it's my job to facilitate that learning. And if I don't, and you've tried, that's on me, or you got to let me know, because that's what I'm here for. Yep.
So, Zach, do we have a learning outcome for every assignment that we have?
Right. By we, do you mean us in our department, or?
The universe, anyone.
Best practice.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So if I say, I've got these 6 assignments in my class.
Yeah.
And I have they're all different.
Yeah.
Then do I phrase a learning objective for each of those to say, this is.
Yeah. 2 separate assignments could be part of the same outcome. So like quizzes and tests can be assessing one particular aspect of knowledge, right? Or a paper and a presentation could be doing one assessment. So on the one, what was it, editing skills? It was they edit the work of their peers, and they have to walk us through a presentation where they sort of go through how they would edit a New York Times article, right? So those are 2 totally different assignments that allow me to assess their editing skills.
But
right?
The answer is yes, right?
The what?
Every assignment should have one or more learning outcomes.
If you
I would.
Yes.
Yeah, should be.
Because if you
Yeah.
start with your backwards by design,
Yeah.
and you're saying, this is what I want
Yes.
students to be able to do, then everything that I do in my class should point back to one of them.
Yes. That's the back, yeah.
Otherwise, it's not necessary for them
Yes.
to be doing that thing.
Yes. That's, where did I put, that's a really good point, right? Because I'm running out of time here, and this is just kind of a little bit of that backwards design. Start with the SLOs, then think about the assessments, then the materials you need, and then the schedule, which is just really important. I've started putting the schedule starting on the second page of my syllabus. Policies, those are all very important. Karen gave a workshop last month, and they're really important to have, but from a student perspective, right? Student learning outcomes, the grading schema, and then the schedule, because that's all ultimately what they do, because we all have problems of time and space, but that's where you can align all these things, right? So I think it's actually helpful to have for each outcome potentially multiple assignments that get to that assessment, because it gives students more opportunities, right? And that doesn't always work out that way, right? I mean, it doesn't. And I think ultimately, what I'm trying to get at here is this sort of balanced approach. So my categories of content, connection, and craft is that you can kind of, again, I'm not trying to throw out the traditional lecture necessarily or quizzes and tests. I just think having a balance of assignments and outcomes, I think, can help also just as a function of our opportunity or our providing opportunities for students to demonstrate that outcome. Because we know some students may not do well with quizzes and tests. Some may have weaker writing skills, right? And if they're incoherent, you're going to mark them poorly, even if they understood it. If they can't express themselves, they have some responsibility there too, but maybe they could list, identify, classify through the quizzes and tests, right? Or in a presentation, right? So again, these aren't even though I have them like this and the bubbles, right, and everything like that, I don't see necessarily higher order thinking necessarily. I think the higher order comes from having a blend of these. And that could be argued and everything like that. So I was going to then have you write down 3 assessments. But at any rate, I do want to just, as we kind of near the end here, these were the workshop outcomes, and I've added kind of competency, proficiency, in something that's more aspirational, right? Like, attendees should be able to adopt student learning outcomes for their courses and syllabi. And I think at just a base level, knowing how many syllabi are on campus, just use course objectives, I think just starting off by those of us here, moving to student learning outcomes. Because even if you don't buy all the assessment language and you're like, forget it. Like, I promise you, as I tried to demonstrate in the first 10 minutes of this workshop, that's going to create a better rapport between you and your students. That shifts the orientation and register when you're using, even if your student learning objectives or course objectives are written the same as a good SLO, when students hear your objectives, that's great. That's your objectives. What's for me? And it's reasonable for a student investing in an education to get hit with SLO, their outcomes, rather than your objectives. Now again, if you want to share your goals or objectives, great, awesome, do it. But I would probably lead with the thing that students will be able to do. Create effective student learning outcomes that employ operational verbs, preview assignments, and can be assessed. So that kind of gets to, and I think this is where we would get to proficiency, right? And convince college department unit colleagues to use course and program. We didn't even get into program outcome statements and everything like that. And this is a little bit more aspirational, but I would say knowing what the Cal State system went through with WASC, this is going to be coming. But again, I don't mean to scare anyone with that, and I don't think we should do it at gunpoint either in that way. But I think ultimately this really helps an overall pedagogical culture we're trying to establish here at ISU, is that this is about collaborating and sharing best practices for clear and imaginative curriculum, right? My own sense is I work with and know of people throughout the university who just seem like really imaginative, amazing teachers. But I also think, and again, this is me, but it's the multi-million-dollar question for ISU right now. Given certain retention, graduation, enrollment issues, can all this SLO and assessment stuff improve retention? I think so. And I know certain people at the university who maybe study this sort of stuff or work in this stuff every day might think so, but there is a certain level of resistance maybe to that. But the big thing is, I think it might be helpful to just start with that sort of open sort of culture for it. So just in terms of discussion, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I really want to thank PI and all the support we've gotten from the College of Education for this year. But also, like, I think we should also expect, if I did convince you, and maybe I didn't, there's going to be faculty resistance from instructors, and part of that is the external don't have the support and time, and internal, I just don't buy it. I mean, those things are real. They exist. They will be something to confront. But I just want to thank you, and I'm happy to take questions, and I know we only have a couple minutes left. Thank you for sticking with me. Yes?
I think you just touched on it right at the end, but how much of the SLOs should you be mindful of what your entire department is trying to achieve? And if maybe one of your SLOs might make a colleague's or their SLOs more difficult or vice versa?
Yeah. So it's a really good question, and part of it is, and it's in Edelman's essay, and this is also something that is going to be probably at some point prioritized, is program level outcomes. And so that's something I think in terms of collaboration that could lead to better pedagogical practices. This is something we should be discussing with our colleagues in some ways, right? Because, I mean, I know, and I'm guilty of this. When we put together a media literacy class, we sat around the table, and we're like, okay, what textbook should we use? Right? We all agreed on the content. And to a certain extent, I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit because that was a gen ed course. In a gen ed course, you got to make sure you're hitting certain outcomes. So we agreed that it has to do this, but we were like, there needs to be an assignment that does blank, right? And so, but I think that could really help. So my next workshop, not to put this on you now, I'd be happy to sell that to you. No, is on this thing called signature assignments. And part of that is basically establishing this link between program level outcomes and SLOs, and how to sort of align that a little bit to create an assessment. So, I mean, that's kind of the very, very brief way of putting it. But that's an important discussion to have, is program level outcomes and then course level SLOs.
All the faculty, the program level has to buy in, right?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, but remember, I think there is, because there is, right, academic freedom would be, okay, we all agree on these SLOs, but I can create different assignments to reach those student learning outcomes. But it does get a little bit thorny because a good student learning outcome potentially previews an assignment or an assessment level. Any other questions? Yes?
So I was curious and interested in what you're saying about the question of how does your research inform your I think there's a whole body of research out there, a scholarship of teaching and learning, right? And that is a valid research field, right? And what they do is they look at teaching.
Oh, you mean so for someone in education?
The scholarship of teaching and learning is not out of the School of Education.
Right.
It's out of other disciplines.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So you're talking about someone who...
They do research.
Right.
Research is studying how effective their class is.
Okay.
But there can be lots of different
It's basically a psychologist saying, how can we improve the pedagogy of psychology? That's
Okay.
scholarship of teaching and learning is more focused on your specific discipline. It's not just out of education.
Well, I think framing the question that way would be good, because that's not necessarily what's typically being asked. It's how does your research on cells or whatever inform your teaching of biology 101, not necessarily, I mean, I think a question about what best pedagogical practices within this discipline are you familiar with or that you incorporate, that would be a knockout question. And you're right, there are people in each discipline who are very invested in pedagogical scholarship, for sure. That would be, I think, a more optimum question on a job interview. So my objection is to like the way that question is usually asked. Well, hey, thank you so much. I mean, I really appreciate you bearing with me on a late Wednesday afternoon with a lot going on. And I just want to thank you. We will throw this up on the PI website. And again, within the PowerPoint itself, there's a few links, and maybe I can tease that out and we'll have bullet points to them and everything like that. All right? Cool, thank you.